careful and get it up.
On the way. No, returned by Chris Davis. Davis goes left. Davis gets a block. Davis has another block. Chris Davis. No flags. Touchdown.
I was 8 years old when this play happened. I don't know what I was doing on that night, as I wasn't into football yet and wouldn't be for another 2-ish years. Chances are I was probably playing pretend, talking to friends, or playing mobile games on the iPad. But the point is, I was minding my own business like most 8-year-olds do, and was completely oblivious to the fact that one of, if not the greatest play in college football history had happened. Anyway, after 2013, Auburn would go on to win 2 more Iron Bowls in 2017 and in 2019. And after that, they would not win a single Iron Bowl in the 2020s decade. And I'm sorry to rub the salt in the wound for my Tigers fans watching, but you came so close to beating Alabama in 2021 and 2023. And I think you guys know this. And man, I was rooting for y'all. Y'all were so close. You were an out of bounds and a 4th and 31 away from winning. If a few things had gone right, you would have not only won both Iron Bowls, but you'd have likely knocked Alabama out of the college football playoffs in both instances, as Alabama was a one-loss team going into both Iron Bowls. Yeah, Bama had a really strong schedule, but chances are they were going to have to settle for a New Year's Six dance. But anyway, in this video, I'm going to be exploring an alternate timeline. I first started exploring what if the Kick Six never happened. What if Alabama won the Iron Bowl and subsequently faced Florida State in the national championship, which would have likely happened. They would have also won as Auburn held a lead deep into the 4th quarter, but Florida State won on a second touchdown. So I can see Alabama definitely winning. But anyway, while researching this topic, I realized that all roads lead to the same path, and you'll see what that means in a minute. So I went with, what if the Kick Six happened and ruined Alabama's dynasty? Now, so what if Alabama's dynasty was ruined by this one play? Okay, when I mean ruin, I don't mean they go 3-9 every season and miss out on a bowl game. I mean, they're great, they're a top 10 team, but they're not always making the CFP. This play in our timeline actually didn't cause them to go down that road. If anything, they won 3 more titles. So what exactly has to happen for Alabama, in quotation marks, ruin their dynasty? I mean, in 2014, Alabama returned 7 key players on offense, 5 on defense, and few on special teams. Those players included Amari Cooper, Landon Collins, Eddie Jackson, Jonathan Allen, and 2015 Heisman winner Derrick Henry. In their 2014 recruiting class, they had Rashaan Evans, Marlon Humphrey, J.K. Scott, and USFL star Bo Scarborough. All these players mentioned, excluding J.K. Scott, were 4 or more stars. Alabama was loaded. So, how do we get this team to basically be one notch below what they actually were in our timeline? Well, it starts with this man, aka the greatest coach in college football history, and coaching hires. So, how did Nick Saban actually react to his team losing 2 games in a row, which, excluding 2013, hasn't happened since 2008? Heck, Kalen DeBauer hasn't even had this happen, showing that Nick put his trust in the right guy. Well, Saban had the reactions that one would expect. Reports suggest that he was brought to tears after the initial Kick Six. Former Alabama kick returner Christian Jones stated that it was a funeral moment, And it was exactly that. It ruined their chances at not just a title that year, but a three-peat. The kick six was a missed execution on their part, but behind the scenes, Nick Saban focused on a shift in his offensive playstyle. According to color analyst for CBS Gary Danielson, and I'm quoting this, the RPO pass that Nick Marshall hit before the kick six changed everything for Alabama. Nick said, okay, if this is how things are going to be called, we're going to have to change too. If that's going to be the rule and they're not going to call the lineman downfield for blocking, I'm going to do it too. That is when the philosophical switch occurred, and that led to the hiring of Lane Kiffin and the opening up of the Alabama offense. Furthermore, Barrett Jones, a player on the Tide at the time, stated, and again I'm quoting this line, I can't defend that. When the offensive linemen show run for 3 or 4 seconds and then the quarterback gets to the edge, it forces the defensive back to run up at the quarterback or stay with the wide receiver. Saban just said, I've got to run a style of offense like that. It's almost as if Saban admitted that he needed a new style to fit in. Everyone else was using faster pace and spreading the field, while Saban was using the old playbook philosophy with the quarterback under center. Let's analyze the game Alabama played after the Iron Bowl, the 2014 Sugar Bowl between them and Oklahoma. Alabama was a 16-point favorite, yet how did they lose to Oklahoma 31-45? Well, to start, Sooners quarterback Trevor Knight absolutely went off, going 32 for 44 for 348 yards, 4 touchdowns, while Alabama gave up 5 turnovers. Knight passed 44 times, as previously mentioned. Meanwhile, A.J. McCarron just 30 times. Meanwhile, the Tide had 35 rushing attempts. Yes, they had Derrick Henry and T.J. Yeldon went for 100 yards. And yes, they passed 387 yards. But boy, was their offense predictable. They ran more than they passed and nearly had double rush attempts than completions. Meanwhile, Knight passed 44 times, while the Sooners rushed just 30 times. That is 1.5 times more than they rushed. Bob Stoops, the Sooners coach, ran a hybrid air raid / read option offense. They were fast tempos, and Saban's Tide just couldn't catch up. The rest of the league had caught up to him. So he hired Lane Kiffin. For this timeline to work where Alabama is weakened, Saban doesn't adapts but not fast enough, and doesn't hire Lane Kiffin or someone with a similar playstyle to change Alabama's offense. And it's actually believable Saban does this. He was a reject modernity, embrace tradition type guy, stating that he wasn't a fan of how modern offenses ran at the time, but the kick six and coaxing assistant coaches got into hires. So basically, yeah, the kick six was a wake-up call, and this is where the two timelines I discussed earlier diverge. The result is almost the same. If the kick six never happened, they win the national title and become the first program to three-peat since the Minnesota Golden Gophers in the 1930s. And it's likely that they don't change the offensive scheme even if they don't win the national championship. Going back to Danielson's quote about the 2 straight losses led to Kiffin's hiring. Even if Alabama three-peats, them using traditional methods will not work in the long run. Alabama hiring Kiffin, who changed their offense, opened it up, made it more spread out, was the best thing that could happen to them. So in a twist, this video should not be titled "What if the kick six ruined Alabama's dynasty?" It should be titled "What if Lane Kiffin wasn't hired / what if Alabama rejected modernity?" Let's go with the former, as it rings nice, as it is an actual point of divergence. Either way, whether it's the return never happening or Saban not having an offensive epiphany, without adaptation, Alabama never becomes this generational monster. So let's explore this timeline, as there's been way too much build-up. So who does Saban hire as offensive coordinator for 2014? Maybe he stays put or promotes someone internally, like Mario Cristobal or Billy Napier, whose offensive system isn't a direct copy but similar to what Saban was running at the time. Now, in 2014, in our timeline, Bama went 12-1 and was the number 1 seed in the college football playoffs, but there were some chances they could have dropped games. They went 14-13 against a mid-Arkansas team, had an overtime win in Baton Rouge, and went 25-20 against a Mississippi State team that was number 1 ranked at the time. Any one of these losses make Bama a 2-loss team. Now, for the most flippable one, I'd say it was Arkansas, as not only is it the closest margin of victory, but Arkansas lost due to a missed PAT attempt. If we flip that PAT attempt, chances are Arkansas potentially wins it maybe in overtime, and Bama enters Selection Sunday 11-2. And here are the other teams in the mix. Alabama losing to Arkansas, who again was mid, is a huge blow. Oregon lost to unranked Arizona, but they faced them in their Pac-12 championship, with the Wildcats going on to play in the Fiesta Bowl. Ohio State lost to Virginia Tech, who was also mid. Baylor lost to West Virginia, who was also meh. But TCU lost to Baylor, who was ranked top 5 at the time. All the other teams had at most 1 loss. So with that being said, here's the updated college football playoff. And here was a bracket that was shown on conference championship weekend. TCU fell to the 6th seed despite not playing. And while some might shout SEC bias, in this timeline, an 11-1 TCU team that lost to a top 5 ranked Baylor team is not falling in favor of a 2-loss Bama team that not only lost to Ole Miss, but to a 6-6 or 7-5, in this case Arkansas team. So Alabama and Baylor respectively are the first 2 to go out. Rank them this way or vice versa, but Bama will face Baylor in the Peach Bowl, while Michigan State faces Ole Miss in the Cotton Bowl. For the college football playoff, just like in our timeline, Oregon loses to Ohio State, but they lose in New Orleans. Meanwhile, TCU will basically beat FSU, and probably by a bigger margin. And in the national championship, Ohio State wins just like in our timeline, this time beating TCU. And now we go to the Peach Bowl and Cotton Bowl. Baylor gave up a 20-point lead against Michigan State in the Cotton Bowl in our timeline, so I don't think they'll beat Alabama. MSU beats Ole Miss. So, Alabama, after making the BCS championship in 2009, 2011, and 2012, and winning all 3 respectively, they fell short 2 years in a row. They don't make the expanded bracket, and that is obviously going to cause a lot of concern. 2 straight years of missing the BCS/CFP since Saban was hired. Perhaps some recruits in 2015 try elsewhere, maybe jumping ship to programs like, say, Florida State, LSU, Ole Miss, etc. So, Alabama is more weakened than in our timeline, and looking at their 2015 schedule, they won a ton of matchups by large margins. The closest win was against Tennessee, which they won 19-14. Maybe a pass goes wrong or a fumble happens and the Volunteers win that matchup and end up going 10-3. Bama is once again a 2-loss team. Now, I want to go on a bit of a tangent and show you guys a few stats. Here are the QB rushing yards, passing yards, yards per catch, and sacks. And here they are in 2013. Okay, now 2014. Okay, now 2015, and keep in mind, Derrick Henry had a monster season and won the Heisman. So combine that with their defense being improved to a top 3 defense in the country and just giving up 15 points a game, and we see they also ran 3,000 rushing yards in total. Derrick Henry had the 7th most rushing yards and 11th most touchdowns in a season in college football history. But if you analyze these stats and the fact that Alabama's 2014 schedule was a cupcake one compared to their 2015 schedule, their offense, while having a setback, was much more spread out than in 2013. You can see that in the film and stats. Now, without a shift in offense, they'd be more concentrated. They'd have to rely on Derrick Henry much more, and they'd have more sacks with Jake Coker at the center. That combined with maybe a few decommits from important players. And Calvin Ridley also had 1,700 yards, but with a more concentrated offense, he loses several hundred. I think Alabama may limp, well, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but they may struggle to get 11-2, maybe having several one-score games. But in the end, the SEC champion misses out, having to play the Oklahoma State Cowboys in the Sugar Bowl, definitely beating them by like 30 plus points. The college football playoffs, meanwhile, is reshaped like this. Stanford and Alabama become the first two out, with Stanford going to face Ohio State in the Rose Bowl. Both teams are interchangeable in terms of rankings, but in the end, Clemson takes the crown, and Bama has just missed 3 straight BCS National Championships / college football playoffs. This is when the damage starts. People still commit to Alabama because of Nick Saban and his reputation, but with these 3 straight misses, he doesn't get as many good commits like in our timeline. The Tide still get top recruits, but some who have gotten offers to more successful schools may jump ship. For example, in 2016, Alabama got the 2 best linebackers in their state, Ben Davis and Mac Wilson. Those 2 likely stick around, but at the same time, there is a possibility that one of them goes elsewhere. I mean, Davis did get an offer from Clemson, who in this timeline is the defending champion, while Alabama doesn't make the college football playoff. With 24 commits in our timeline, the Tide are bound to lose some in the class of 2016. I mean, look at Clemson. Here's where the recruiting classes ranked from 2017 to 2021 based on average grades and ranked overall. And now here's where they're ranked from 2022 to 2025, when Clemson wasn't a top-tier program anymore. The point is, the Tide can still recruit great, but the performance needs to show for it to be the top class in every year. The Tide's 2015, 2016, and 2017 classes are going to drop off and not be ranked number 1 consistently, and that can make all the difference. Just go to 247 Sports and you'll see the top classes are teams that are either historic blue bloods for decades or teams that have just come off semifinals / national championship appearance like 2025. If we look at the top classes, we see Texas, who's a historical powerhouse, with the semifinalists and made the 2024 and 2023 CFP. Georgia has a case for being the team of the 2020s. Oh, and there's Alabama again due to the decades of dominance. Ohio State, national champions. Oregon, number 1 seed. Michigan and Florida are historic powerhouses. Alabama in 2016 maybe has a top 5 recruiting class, but they're not top 3. Maybe 5th ranked or 4th ranked. And same for their 2015 class. However, these margins, again, make the difference between a blue blood and the team to beat. Bama in our timeline in 2016 won 13-0 before entering the playoffs. Now they lose their 3rd straight game to Ole Miss, which they won 48-43 in our timeline, and maybe lose to LSU if a few things go right for the Tigers. Looking at the schedule, they either go 11-2 again or 12-1. Regardless of where the selectors rank them, Clemson still wins the 2016 national championship, but this time they win 2 straight championships. If the Tide do make it to their first ever CFP in this timeline, they probably aren't the number 1 seed, maybe a number 2 or 3 seed, but they still likely miss out on a national championship berth. Let's say they make the playoffs, as this might be a sign for Saban that the old system still works, and even if they can't make it to the Natty, they still stay put in terms of how offensive playstylers run and get a better recruiting class in 2017. Clemson this time becomes the team to beat, with Ohio State potentially being a contender with the Natty and potentially making the national championship. However, Alabama is slowly starting to feel human, even if they get a CFP appearance. In our timeline, the Tide lost to Auburn 14-26, and this is the year they finally start to come back down to earth. Against Texas A&M, they won 27-19. However, with a weaker offense, and if Texas A&M commits one less turnover and manages to get lucky, the Aggies potentially win. Same thing against the Mississippi State Bulldogs, who were a Hail Mary away. If a few bounces go right, and if the Bulldogs somehow get a turnover, all of a sudden the Tide are 10-2 or even 9-3. And that begs the question, if the Tide don't make the college football playoffs, does Tua ever start, as he was started due to Jalen Hurts being benched for poor performance? Now, as for college football playoff rankings, some rankings in later weeks had Auburn in the top 4 before they lost to Georgia. Wisconsin went to the Big Ten Championship ranked number 4 and nearly came back down 21-10, but the Buckeyes bested them 20-21, thus making them fall to the 6th seed. And Wisconsin did have a pretty easy schedule, though they did beat 2 ranked teams and my Northwestern Wildcats, who would finish 10-3 to end the season. And it's not unheard of for teams to lose the conference championship and make the college football playoffs if they have a really strong resume. Case in point, 2022 TCU. It comes down to UCF or Wisconsin for the 4th spot, and since our world still sucks in this alternate timeline, Wisconsin gets in. The controversy is the same. The little guys are left out, and Wisconsin, playing a relatively weak schedule, probably loses against Clemson. Clemson makes it to the national championship. Georgia in our timeline held a 13-point lead against the Tide, but fell to a 2nd and 26, which cemented Tua's legacy. But facing Clemson, who showed much weakness against Bama, loses barely to the Bulldogs, making Georgia your 2017 national champions. If Alabama never adapts, Clemson might take their spot as the team to beat, with championships in 2015, 2016, and 2018, as fans start cheering "We want Clemson" more and more. And with less competition and slightly stronger recruiting classes, they even extend their dynasty into the 2020s. Georgia likely takes 2017, Ohio State might win 2020, and so forth. There are so many questions one could ask, and the truth is we will never know the exact answer. It's really hard to forecast these things, and I'm already running on time. And if I were to dive into other questions, such as what happens to Jalen and Tua, does Jalen transfer, how's the draft reshaped, where does Lane Kiffin go instead, what happens to the coaching tree, I would be here all day. The coaching tree is a big one, as so many were under Saban wing. The only one I'm confident of is Kirby Smart getting a job with the Georgia Bulldogs, as he was a defensive coordinator for the Tide for 8 seasons. He is still likely getting that job. There will be several changes on how he coaches. In the end, there are so many variables to this scenario, but here's what I mapped out from 2014 to 2019. So, that's pretty much it. Yes, I admit I clickbaited you all into thinking Alabama crashes and burns, and I'm sorry about that. Though, to be fair, if you're a Tide fan and seeing your team constantly on the outside looking in after years of championship success is not a good feeling. Scratch that. For any program, regardless of pedigree, to constantly just near miss a playoff chance or to not win the national championship after countless times making it or having a shot is probably more painful than not having a shot at all. I asked my Sooners fans, is this how you felt during those late 2010s runs after being bounced out so many times in the CFP? Please let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, guys.